All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today I'll be doing my 2022 AAC predictions. There's going to be timestamps below if you'd like to jump around. I'll be talking a little bit about every team, and then I'll cap things off my conference title prediction and some awards. Kicking things off, though, Cincinnati, I project them to finish at the top of this conference once again, despite losing a lot. On offense, they lose Mike Denbrock, Desmond Ritter, Jerome Ford is gone. But Ben Bryant, he was with Cincinnati from 2018 to 2020, went to Eastern Michigan last year for a stint, 3,100 plus yards as a starter, and now he returns. So he's got a lot of experience in this offense, or at least in this program, even though Denbrock is gone. Evan Prater, he's a former four-star. He's probably the better runner by far. Those two are going to battle for the quarterback. I think Bryant certainly has the leg up in that fold, though. Look at the running game. Corey Kenner, he transfers over from LSU, joining a handful of veterans. Ryan Montgomery, Charles McClellan at running back. 172 yards per game last year for this running game. Jerome Ford, though, big loss. 1,300 plus yards, almost 20 touchdowns. A lot of explosiveness there. Corey Kenner, he's more of a one-cut guy. So we'll see how he fits into this. A variety of pass catchers are back, though. They don't lose much here in the receiving game. Tyler Scott, Trey Tucker, plenty of speed with those guys. Jaden Thompson, he's a bit bigger at 6'2", 187. Overall, a lot of quickness, speed. This receiving core certainly has that. Josh Wiley at tight end, 332 yards and 6 touchdowns. I was a big fan of his last year. So things are not going to be as easy on offense, I think, as they were last year. But, losing out Pierce is big. Michael Young departs. But overall, they've experienced pass catchers, some experienced running backs, guys that have been in the program a long time. And to make things easy for them, though, is in the trenches. They return all 5 starters on the O-line. James Tunstall, Jake Renfro, 2 notables. 3 guys landed on the preseason all-conference team from this offensive line. So I think it's a pretty sturdy unit. I expect them to regress a little bit, but not too much, especially if they can take care of the ball quite well. 37 points per game last season. Tough mark to repeat, but I think they'll certainly be at 32-plus per contest, no doubt. The defense, this was an elite unit for many seasons. They lose 3 draftees in the secondary, though, a handful of starters up front. But looking at linebacker, Ivan Pace joins his brother, 125 tackles, 13 TFLs last year at Miami of Ohio. Deshaun, 95 tackles, 4 picks here for the Bearcats. I was very impressed with him. His brother was very good last year. So I think these guys are going to make a really good pairing. They're going to play really hard. Huber Wilson, Tyler Van Vossen, 2 other veterans there in the middle of their defense. But there's 3 seniors on the D-line of this 3-4 unit. Jawan Briggs, he's not a 3-3-5 rather. Jawan Briggs, a UVA transfer. I like what he's going to be able to bring to the table. Malik Vann, 33 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss. He's going to be one of those breakout stars on the D-line, as is Jabari Taylor at 5.5 tackles for loss. They stopped the run quite well for this scheme. They did allow nearly 150 yards per game, 3.5 yards per carry. They got gashed by Alabama, of course, but they absolutely stuffed Houston, Notre Dame, ECU on the ground. That's the theme with this defense over the last couple of years is they play these tough offenses in conference, and they actually stonewall. You look at ECU over the years. Houston, for example, last year. UCF, I think, is a great example because that's a team that really struggled on offense with Dylan Gabriel even over the last couple of years. So Cincinnati, this is a Power 5-like defense. They coach them up. They play very well. They dominate this conference on defense. And even though there's a lot of talent, I expect that to continue. Arquan Bush should move to CB1. Javon Hicks, the other veteran that's back. A lot of new faces. Jacob Dingle at safety is a senior. Overall, I love Cincinnati, top to bottom. They lose a lot, though, so this is going to be a big year for Luke Fickell. He stays around after declining some high-profile gigs. I believe Cincinnati joining the Big 12 is why he stuck around. If they didn't, then I'm very sure he probably would have been elsewhere. Looking at the runner-up in the regular season standings, I have the Houston Cougars, arguably the top offense in the conference. Clayton Tune, he finally stepped up this year. Had 4 of his 10 INTs on the season. In Week 1 against Texas Tech was much better. Remainder of the year, 3,500-plus yards, 30 touchdowns. Loses 2 of his top 3 pass catchers, though, but they still got some good guys coming back. Keyshawn Carter, 331 yards in 9 games. Christian Chahan, one of my more favorite tight ends, 37 grabs, just shy of 400 yards. They use him in a variety of different ways. Then Nathaniel Dell, 90 grabs, 1,329 yards, and 12 touchdowns. He was so good for them last year. Severely undersized, but he's a great route runner with a lot of speed. And alongside those guys are going to be 4 transfers. Cody Jackson from Oklahoma being the most notable. I think Matthew Golden, he's an impressive 4-star. They're very high on. So we'll see what happens with the receiving core, but they should continue to grow, as should Tune. Big loss in Alton McGaskill. He tore his ACL in the spring. Strong freshman season. One of the top TD scorers in all of America with 16. They lose that 1-2 punch, but, Tazon Henry, he was great last year. He's going to take over the lead duties. 5'7", 170, a smaller, compact, shiftier back. 513 yards and 7 touchdowns of his own last season. That's 4.6 yards per carry. So he had a very good, quiet year. Brandon Campbell, he should take over that number 2 role. He's a USC transfer. The biggest problem is Houston's the O-line needs to be better. One of the worst groups in college football last season. They just got absolutely stonewalled. That's a big reason when they played Cincinnati, I was like, this team's not going to win because the offensive line's going to get absolutely bullied, and they allowed double-figure tackle for losses. I think almost double-figure sacks as well. They're just getting bullied. There was a big theme last year. They get a lot of veterans back, though, so we'll see what happens on the offensive line. Looking on the other side of the ball, though, the trenches for Houston on defense was very solid. It was a big reason why they had such an impressive season. They allowed 32 points per game 2 years ago. This past season, they led the nation in third down defense, 20 points per game allowed. Incredibly deep D-line from last year remains a strong suit. Derek Parrish, D'Anthony Jones, 5 and 6 sacks, respectively, at defensive end. Defensive tackle, Atlas Bell, Latrell Bankson. There's some good depth on the D-line. No real size on the interior, though, but these guys are good, hard workers. And, that veteran leadership is certainly going to be there for them on this defensive front. 10th ranked run defense last year. Cincinnati game was the only time they kind of looked average against the run. Other than that, they were very sound all season long. Leading tackler Donovan Mutin is back at linebacker. Malik Robinson, he had 34 tackles. He's going to step up into the lineup here. He's got some experience. The 43 sacks from this ball club was 6th in college football, so this defense was just phenomenal in the front seven. Pass defense was also great. They were 19th in college football and 194 yards per game allowed through the air. They just covered so well, inconsistent unit overall. They were very important, though, in the success on third down for this unit. They lose at least 3 starters in the back end. Marcus Jones is one of them. They're destined to take a step back, but I think this front seven can certainly do the heavy lifting. Defense, I think they'll regress just slightly, but the D-line, I think the run defense, these guys might progress. So number 2 for me in the conference, this is a very good football team. Coming in third, I have the UCF Knights. Gus Malzahn is an interesting ball club this season. Dylan Gabriel transfers out. Mikey Keeney, he was not that great, 17 to 16 to 19 ratio. That's good. He was a solid game manager overall, 157 yards per game. John Rice Plumlee, he transfers in from Ole Miss. He's more known for his speed, though. Very fast, a lot of quickness, still a bit of an unknown as a passer. He's one of 6 transfers on offense, though. Kamira Gamble at tight end, he arrives. 2 linemen to insert on the left side. Lose plenty of production return. Lead wide receiver Ryan O'Keefe, 84 receptions, 812 yards. Kobe Hudson, though, he reunites with Gus Malzahn, a really good route runner. From his days at Auburn last season, a very impressive one for him. Things did not work out there with him and that bunch. So they got some nice receivers here. A lot of young youth and inexperience, but I think their top 2 guys are going to be just fine. Jalen Robinson, of course, he transfers to Ole Miss. A nice 1-2 punch in the backfield. Isaiah Bowser, he's a bruiser, 703 yards, 9 touchdowns in 8 games. Johnny Richardson, 733 yards, 7 yards per carry in 13 games. So these guys were really good last year as a bunch. 196 yards per game on the ground. They add Plumlee as well. So they add John Rice Plumlee, so that should put them around 220-plus yards per game. That's going to be the bar for me if he's the starting quarterback. And if they use him that way, I expect they will, because he's just so good on the edge. You can really put a tear on defenses. Remember LSU's defense from a couple of years ago, the national title-winning defense. They were put on skates against this guy. He's that good. Good chunk back on defense for this bunch. 24.5 points per game allowed last year. Following the loss of Tatum Bethune, though, things are going to be a little tough. They add Braden Jenkins and Terrence Lewis, 2 former high-end recruits. They transfer out of Maryland, end up here in Orlando. So I think these guys are going to provide a lot of athleticism, some playmaking here in the middle of the defense. Tremont Morris, 10 of his 23 tackles were tackles for loss. So he was a pretty quiet producer, but he certainly made his impact felt. Josh Selzar, 6'4", 265. Not great size, but he's a good duo. It provides them a good duo of edge rushers here for UCF. Hunter Lee, 320. He's another Auburn transfer. Good size altogether on this interior D-line. Added athleticism on linebacker, though, again, will allow this run defense to keep growing. So I expect them to step up in that category. Secondary struggled in the first 3 games of the season, got it together. After that, with the SMU late in the year being the only blemish, really, 36th ranked Packers defense. They should continue to grow as well. Devontae Brown, he had 13 pass breakups. Quadric Bullard, Devon Wilson, those are some veterans coming back. Defense should improve a great deal. UCF's going to be third for me. They can certainly compete in this conference. We'll see what happens on the offensive side of the ball. It's an interesting quarterback battle, but I do think they have a very good running game, pretty solid offensive line, and they have 2 notable weapons at least. It's going to give some of these other guys a chance to step up. I have the ECU Pirates. This is a pretty sound football team. Holton Ahlers, he's back at quarterback. He's been around forever, it seems. He has a nice group of weapons to work with him as well. 3,100-plus yards, 18 touchdowns, 6 rushing touchdowns. 5th year as a starter now. C.J. Johnson, 35 grabs, 520 yards. Josiah Hatfield, nearly 20 yards per catch. I expect him to be a breakout performer for them. They added 3 transfers. Isaiah Winstead, Jalen Johnson, 2 notables there. And they also got Jarrett Gardner as well. So this is an interesting receiving core. They got some experience, some depth, some overall impressive playmaking. The pass protection needs to be much better, though, and more explosive in the passing game for the most part. They should not be I thought they lacked explosiveness last year, considering how much talent they have and who they have at quarterback. So that's one focal point for me. Running game's pretty sound too, though. Keaton Mitchell, 1,100-plus yards, 9 touchdowns. Raji Harris had only 3.5 yards per carry, but 579 yards and a few scores of his own. So they have a nice little 1-2 here in the backfield, and then to add on to what we just said about their passing game. So I think this is a really good offense. Should average 30-plus points per game. I don't believe they hit that mark last year just because they are not great in the red zone. Converting on third down can be an issue for them. So very disappointing to see them fall just shy of that 30 per game mark, but they should definitely be 30 to 33 this season, no doubt. The defense should continue to improve. It's one of the top in the conference in returning production. Well, they lose Jaquan McMillan, William Saba, 9 picks between those guys, lose their leading tackler at linebacker. They added 8 transfers, though, in the portal on this defense. They don't possess relatively good size on the D-line, especially the interior D-line, but they still got productive pass rush from their interior. Elijah Morris, he made some good plays for them. Emmanuel Hickman, as a freshman last season, had 7 tackles for loss. That led the team. Jeremy Lewis, outside linebacker, 4 sacks with 49 tackles. So they got some nice little players here. Young front 7 that gets nearly everyone back, so I think they're certainly going to grow against the run. They do lose that leading tackle at linebacker, but Xavier Smith, Miles Berry are back. They were very good contributors last season. Overall, the run defense made some good strides for ECU, and they need to keep progressing, though. The secondary's been filled with playmaking the last few seasons, only allowed 59% comp rate, too, last year. Struggled heavily early in the year. Middle part of the season, they performed very well, though. Malik Fleming, 11 plays on the ball last year. He's back at corner. Jari Wilson, 44 tackles. Interested to see his role. It was a safety last year. I think the secondary rests a bit, but not by a whole bunch. I think this is a team that can really compete. But as I noted at the top of the show, talking about Cincinnati, they've been completely stonewalled by the Bearcats. So that's a team, that's a game they're going to circle because that's a team they've really struggled against. And that's going to be a focal point for this bunch this season. The 5th position is SMU. Rhett Lashley takes over for the departing Sonny Dykes. The offense suffers some pretty major losses, but the unit is overall in pretty good shape. Tanner Mordecai, Oklahoma transfer, performed very well last season, 3,600-plus yards, 39 touchdowns, 302 yards per game. Lose 3 of his 4 top pass catchers, but Rashee Rice is back. 64 grabs, 670 yards, and 9 touchdowns a season ago. I like Bio Corrales from UNC, 80 career receptions. Roderick Daniels, 5'9", 191. Played sparingly last year, but he was a player they certainly were intrigued by. So I think the receiving core, they do lose some major guys, but I think no problem with this offensive scheme. They're going to get guys involved. Trey Siggers, he's back at running back, 727 yards, 7 scores. Tyler Levine was a solid option as number 3 last year. He's going to step up into a backup role this year. 161 yards per game on the ground. Respectable running game for the nature of this offense. They like to air it out. They still perform pretty well on the ground. Like to see that. ULC's Bentley, he was a big asset for them last year. He transfers to Ole Miss. 70+% of the defensive production's back. It's good news for this defense. Important contributors on the defensive line are back. Elijah Chapman, he had 9 tackles for loss. DeVary Levelson, 10 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, 6'5", 266. And then Turner Coxey here at defensive end, 7 tackles for loss of his own. 41st ranked run defense. I think they can continue to grow on that number a good bit. The D-line as a group was good, but rest of the defense not as optimistic. They lose 3 of the top 4 tacklers. All their linebackers weren't exactly perennial playmakers anyways, but Jimmy Phillips, he was one of them that's coming back. They add Kamari Farrar from Oklahoma State, and then 124th ranked pass defense for SMU. I think it's really going to be their struggle this year. Not really seeing much that's really going to encourage me for them in the back end, even though the defensive line can really do the heavy lifting for them, and I think they will, but it's not going to cause them to do much better. I think this offense will definitely keep them in every single game, and SMU, 5th. Coming in 6th, I have the Navy midshipmen, 20 points per game on offense last year. Back-to-back years of completely sluggish offense from this option attack. 226 rushing yards per game. That sounds like a good mark, but it's not, considering they need to be probably at 100-plus more for this triple option to really work. Ty Lavatai, Xavier Irvine, they're going to battle for quarterback. Neither have showcased great command of the offense, and that's really that's where the struggles start. Lavatai did have a team-high 7 touchdowns last year, only 351 yards, though. Completely new group of backs. None of the 3 guys I'm about to name were starters last year. None of them had more than 10 carries last season. Vincent Terrell, Marquell Haywood, Anton Hall. The offensive line, though, should progress quite well with the return of numerous starters. Navy, the defense has been sluggish as well. One of the nation's worst pass rushes. They lose a handful of producers, especially a linebacker. But in the front 7, I like guys like Clay Cromwell, Jacob Busick, Nicholas Straw. I think those guys will step up this fall. Colin Ramos, Tyler Fletcher, 2 names that are going to be leaned on to perform at linebacker. The pass defense was solid on the stat sheet, 51st in college football, but struggled versus the tougher passing attacks, 400-plus to ECU, for example. I have Navy 6th because I just think that Ken Niumatalolo, he's going to get these guys going. They don't struggle. They're not going to be down bad for too long. More effectiveness on offense is obviously the biggest key here. And with that, that's going to allow the defense to step up as well. So I think this is going to be a big year for Navy. Can't really pinpoint why, other than I just think they're going to have the toughness, the discipline, and Ken Niumatalolo this year. This is the 3rd year, I think, for Lavatai and our line at quarterback. So these guys should certainly have a complete understanding of how this unit wants to operate, and I think they're starting to put things together a little bit more this year. Could be completely wrong, but I'm going to put my faith in the midshipmen, and I have them coming in the top half of this conference. Number 6, Tulane, 2-10 last fall, one of the nation's more disappointing teams, especially with that resilient effort week 1 against Oklahoma. Michael Pratt, 2,300 yards, 21 touchdowns, 8 picks, returns 4 of his top 5 pass catchers as well. Sean Wyatt, tight end Tyrick James, he had a team high 429 yards last year, 31 receptions, 4 touchdowns. So they got some guys coming back in this passing attack. Pratt is a respectable dual-threat quarterback, 165 rushing yards per game last year, and they get both running backs back. Cam Carroll, he's been around a few years now, and Tajay Spears, he was a pleasant surprise for them, 863 rushing, over 1K total yards for him, 9 touchdowns. So this Tulane offense, they got some weapons. They should be able to score with 30 points per game themselves this year. One of the nation's worst red zone attacks, though. Plenty of points were being left on the field. The offensive line will also need to get better. But overall, this is a sound offense that should be much better. 2-10 last year was just an absurd mark. But the defense was a big problem for them. They should have been better than it was. Some solid talent all around. Darius Hodges, 6'1", 280. In his second year, put up 16.5 tackles for loss, 5+ sacks from his defensive end spot. 2 great linebackers, though. Nick Anderson, he was third on the team in tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss himself, 73 stops for Dorian Williams. So this front seven has some contributors, some good players overall. The secondary was not good, though. They had no pulse against the passing attacks. 120th in college football, 271 yards per game through the air. They allowed exactly 3 passing touchdowns in 7 straight games during the early part of the season. That's obviously just not good. Malcolm Clark at safety, he's encouraging. 4 picks, 74 tackles. Larry Brooks, another fellow senior safety. So I think the defense, certainly, they have a lot of room for improvement. I think they will, too, because they have those leaders in the front 7, and they got some seniors in the back end that made some plays. So I think the secondary will still struggle overall, but I think they should get a little bit better against the run. Overall, pretty sound pass rush. I like what they have in linebackers. So Tulane, 7th for me, and I think the potential is certainly there for them to continue to grow and be better than that. Coming in at number 8, Tulsa, the Golden Hurricanes, a respectable group on offense. These guys are back. Davis Brin, 3,200+ yards, 18 touchdowns. Biggest problem is he had 16 picks. That's certainly something we want to see him clean up on this year. Demetric Price, Anthony Watkins, these guys both had 500+ rushing yards last year behind Shamari Brooks, who had 1,000+ himself. As a team, 192 rushing yards per game. Good balance on offense. I think that's the most important thing for them, but they need to stop turning the ball over, mainly Brin, because those 16 picks certainly held them down. They stay strong at wide receiver, too. Keelan Stokes enters his 6th year, man. He's been around a while. 166 career grabs, 2,500+ yards. I like him. Juan Carlos Santana, 50 receptions, nearly 700 yards of his own. They also add Isaiah Epps from Kentucky. So they got a good group of starters overall at the skill positions and a quarterback who put up some numbers last year but certainly needs to cut down on the turnovers. They lose plenty of experience as well, but I think the offense, these guys are going to be better if they cut down the turnovers. That's almost a given, I think, for them. The defense, though, they regressed last year, and I think they will again. Some major losses. Jackson Player's gone, Travion Fuller. Those are the 2 most notable ones. Those guys were such high-end producers for them. Leading tackler Justin Wright, 82 tackles, only 1 pick last year, which was a pick 6, so he's coming back, and that's obviously big for them. I do look at guys like Anthony Goodlow, Joseph Anderson. There's some good rotational help on the D-line. They're going to be full-time starters now. They should have good seasons. We'll see if, that lack of depth, though, kind of affects them now that those guys that were good last year for them in a rotational setting are now going to be playing 90% of the snaps. So we'll see what happens there. Quite solid pass defense, but lose a handful of productive assets there. I just noted Fuller, Kandarian Ray, Jay-Z Oliver, Bryson Powers. He's a senior. Those guys are players to watch for me. Solid secondary overall. I think Tulsa, they're going to be an interesting team, mainly because of what they can do on offense. A lot of fun teams here in the AAC this year. Tulsa will be one of them. Number 9, the Memphis Tigers, 30 points per game last season for them. This offense should have been more efficient and effective for what they had. Seth Hennigan, 3,300+ yards, 25 touchdowns. He had 8 picks as well, 300+ yards per game. In his debut season through the air, a very solid season from him. Only 132 rushing yards per game, though, and they did quite deep backfield, and I still think they do. Brandon Thomas, 669 yards, 8 touchdowns, 5.7 yards per carry. Wasn't used much after September, and he wasn't that effective anyways, but those are some still pretty solid numbers there in his first year. Rodriguez Clark wasn't all that impressive himself, but nearly 400 yards on the year. So they got some producers, even though they weren't really consistent. Jay Ducker from NIU, anyway, 1,200 yards for the Huskies, a part of that power running game they implement. The offensive line was quite sturdy, but breathing room on the ground was not there one bit, really. And they do lose a handful of guys, including an NFL draft pick and Dylan Parham. So Memphis, overall, pretty solid offense, especially when you look at guys like Jaden Ivey and Eddie Lewis at receiver, respectable producers for them. They're going to replace Dykes and Calvin Austin, though, so I'm kind of concerned about the passing attack, but I do think Hennigan was really solid last year, and they get a handful of guys involved in the passing course. I don't think it's going to be a big problem for them, and they can lean on the running game if they have to, at least from a talent standpoint. even though they do need to get some more ground game going. The defense regressed a good bit, nearly 30 points per game allowed for them. Xavier Collins, Jalen Allen, those are some notable producers in the front seven. The run defense was a big liability, though. These guys were just getting torn apart on the ground. The Tigers' pass defense has never really been a good unit either. 3,000-plus yards allowed in 6 of the last 7 seasons for the Tigers. They just need more playmaking, better communication. Rodney Owens, Quindale Johnson, 104 tackles, 11 pass breakups for him. Those are 2 leaders to watch. Overall, I'm not really thrilled with the Memphis defense. There's not much to say because this has never really been a great unit. I think the pass defense needs to try and find a pulse this year, though, because over the most part of the last decade, they've just not been very good. So that's certainly one thing to watch. And of course, that running game, I think they might have to carry this offense this year. It's not the same Memphis as it was under Mike Norvell. Those days, I think, are long gone. So 9th for me for the Tigers, even though I think they could beat anyone in this conference on any given. Item number 10, USF. Jeff Scott, 3-18 his first 2 years. I think this year he's going to start to put things together a little good bit. Gary Bohannon comes over from Baylor. Early in the year was good at protecting the ball. Not so much late in the season. Had an interception in 6 of his last 7 games. Nearly 2,200 yards as a passer. 18 touchdowns. Ran for the 300-plus and found the end zone 9 times on the ground. So they got Gary Bohannon. 4 transfers total on offense. A joy from Clemson, a wide receiver. He's one of them. Only 23 points per game last year for this unit, but the top 3 wide receivers are back. McDaniel with a joy. Xavier Weaver, 41 grabs, 715 yards. Jimmy Horn, he's an explosive playmaker, 400-plus yards for him. Then Omar Dawson as well was a solid contributor. So I think this receiving core, they're very young, got some playmakers. Same could be said for the entire offense, really. 158 yards per game on the ground. Solid group of backs. Jaron Mangum, 221-pounder, 671 yards, 15 touchdowns. That's a very impressive stat for a team that was not good on offense, so that's certainly encouraging for them. Kelly Joyner, he's a smaller, quicker back, 480 yards, 6 yards per carry. And they got Brian Battle. He had 300-plus yards on the ground, 3 kickoff return touchdowns. That's just insane. He was making his contributions there on special teams, and I think they're going to look to get him involved in a variety of different ways on offense. But I think this unit should certainly improve. They got a lot of guys back. It's obviously not great considering how bad they were, but they now have a bit of a leader at quarterback who has played championship football, so I think that's certainly going to be important for them. Solid offensive line, some good young talent. This unit could really make some waves this fall. Biggest problem, though, 35 points per game on defense. They were 118th versus the run, 113th against the pass. Only 9 sacks in 12 games. That was by far dead last in college football. Turn a good bit on defense, but they lose the top contributors on the D-line. That was not a good unit from a season ago. Now they lose some guys, so that's certainly a concern. They do add 6 transfers in the front 7 to try to account for the loss of, a lot of depth in playmaking. Antonio Greer at linebacker. He led the team in tackles for loss, and sacks, 92 stops, 9 tackles for loss. So that's certainly going to be a leader for them. He's going to have to play a lot of good football this year. They're going to have to coach him up and these other guys, though, if they want to get to where they want to be. Get a bit back in the secondary. Dwayne Bowles, Daquan Evans. I think T.J. Robinson made good plays last year as a sophomore. So USF, pretty interesting team. I think the offense should make good strides. Not sold on the defense one bit. They'll likely struggle big time, be the same versus the run and rushing the passer. I don't see the D-line really making any strides, but I do think Jeff Scott will win enough games to keep his job alive at least for one more season. And then coming in last in this conference, I have the Temple Owls. Stan Drayton takes over. Spent the past few years at Texas as, the assistant head coach. And he was, I believe, an offensive coach as well for them. 66% of production's back on you. That scored only 16.3 points per game. Dwayne Mathis, his second year after coming over from Georgia, 1,200-plus yards passing, 6-4 TD-INT ratio. It's not really good. Quincy Patterson, though, makes his way back to FBS after being with Virginia Tech and then North Dakota State. A strong arm, a good dual-threat guy. This is a very underrated talent that's somehow here at Temple. I don't really know how he performed at North Dakota State, but I do believe that team was competing for a title there at the FCS level again. So Patterson, though, I remember this was a very highly touted recruit just a couple of years ago. Never really found his wave anywhere. He's now with his 3rd different program in the many years. Only 109.5 rush yards per game. Edward Saidi is back, though, 330 yards, 3 touchdowns. Darvon Hubbard joins him from Texas A&M. They do get 3 of the top 4 pass catchers back. Jordan Smith at tight end. Jose Barbin, Ahmad Anderson. So they got some respective players here on this offense. And then Isaac Moore at tackle. He's one of 2 seniors there at the offensive line. It was a pretty solid bunch last year. Had plenty of youth getting inserted. Moore, that was 6'7", 300. That's some great size from him. The offense, I think, they'll take some steps forward now that they have some continuity and some guys coming back. Maybe 22 points per game or so is reasonable. But I don't think this offense is going to really win them games by any means. While at the same time, they had one of the nation's worst run defenses. They were 121st in that regard. Had some young players emerge last year. Jordan McGee, 54 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 51 tackles for Kobe Wilson. Safety Alex Odom was another young impact performer. So was Darian Varner, though, 7 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. There's just so many young players allowed in last year's defense. They only had 6 picks, 15 sacks. Those were also 2 of the nation's worst marks. 37.5 points per game allowed. That's certainly going to progress for the Owls. A very interesting team here because they had a lot of guys really on both sides who were really young, make some plays, mainly on defense. So I'm very interested to see how that unit progresses. Which side of the ball will emerge as the strong suit, though, is the biggest thing to watch because neither unit was good. They were polar opposites last year, so we'll see if they can start to gel things together here at Temple. Looking at my conference title and some award predictions, I'm going to go with Cincinnati over Houston. Yet again, I just think the defense is going to be reigning supreme here. I think this is going to be a strong year for both football teams, kind of like it was last year. Houston, I think they'll have the much better offense. Cincinnati, though, they're going to play tough behind 5 starters on the O-line. I think Ben Bryant's going to do just fine with some speedy, athletic pass catchers in the running game. I think they might just fall off just a little bit, but they got a lot of guys that are going to get involved, so depth is not an issue there. I have Nathaniel Dell winning Offensive Player of the Year for 300-plus yards last season. I think he's going to tear things up this year for the Cougars. Defensive Player of the Year, Ivan Pace coming over from Miami of Ohio. It should be impressive if he could do that, especially over his brother Deshaun. But he was just such an impact performer last year. So many people were thrilled with what he was able to do. So I think he's going to come in and make his mark left on this conference here in his first. Now, obviously, he would win Newcomer of the Year as well, but I'm going to give that to Kobe Hudson just to refrain from picking the same player twice here from UCF, or coming from Auburn to join UCF. I think he's going to have a big year. Whoever's at quarterback, even if the passing attack struggles a bit, Hudson's going to be used in a variety of different ways. They can use him underneath on some bubble screens and whatnot. I think he'll be a high-end producer, 800-plus yards at least for him. Luke Fickell, Coach of the Year, obviously repeating in the conference after replacing a lot of guys that went to the NFL. That'd be big time for them. You never see that happen in this conference. I think the biggest breakout star is going to be DeAnthony Jones. He was so good for them in kind of a rotational role for Houston. I think he's going to take that next step now with an increased role now that Logan Hall is gone. And then ECU as the sleeper team, I talked about how much that offense is going to continue to grow as they should when they become more efficient as well this season, more explosive. They got guys like C.J. Johnson, Keaton Mitchell, nice group of receivers, nice running back, and Holton Allers. He's been there for forever. The defense, they had some young guys last year make plays, so that's certainly going to be the unit to watch. And they've not been terrible against a team like Cincinnati, but at the same time, they have, because the last 2 years when they've played, they've absolutely gotten brutalized. This offense has been nowhere. But I do think that they've had more success than most have against Cincinnati. So that's it hasn't been much, though. They've scored under 17 points in both contests. But they can certainly – they have the potential to score points and move the ball in a hurry. So I think this is certainly going to be a big year for them to test the Bearcats. I do believe they'll have to play that game on the road, though. So that's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.